There seemed to be something in this woman's hair. Even her pale skin was dyed black, and the women beside her cast curious glances. Slowly she turned her head, a deep gaze that sends shivers down the spine. She was Polaris, Magneto's daughter. She has the power to manipulate all iron. For a rescue operation, she was captured by the Sentinels, but as soon as she walked into the prison, she was met by a woman, and smiled in triumph. She's the boss here. The scars on her face are from the mutants. As she passed the doorway, Polaris saw a white mutant. She had a blue flashing collar around her neck just like herself. Polaris didn't pay much attention to it. When she returned to her cell, she used her powers to break out of jail, but the next moment, are all the ancestral powers no longer working? The others also laughed mercilessly. When she was confused, the prisoner across the street told her the truth. It was the collar around her neck. It restricts the mutants' powers. She also said that none of the mutants here would make it out alive. After calming down, Polaris was once again determined that she had to get out because she was pregnant. The next day at dinner, Polaris found White to discuss the escape. She thought they could help each other, but to her surprise, White looked from side to side and looked away. At the end, she warned Polaris to stay away from her. It seems that she is afraid of being beaten up by the boss. Polaris has no choice but to go it alone. The boss comes after her again when she's on the loose. She asked her to paint his shoes later. The arrogant Polaris refuses her. The woman stood up sharply. Oh, baby, you don't want to do that. You see, out there, you got powers. But in here, I got powers. Polaris, who was only interested in escaping from prison, didn't care about her. She turned around and left. Instead, she was pinned to the ground by one of the woman's men, punch after punch to her face. As she watched Polaris' nose and mouth bleed, the woman was even more pleased with herself. She heard that Polaris was pregnant. She kicked her in the belly. This finally made Polaris angry. She ignored the sting of the collar. Raising the iron table to the side, she pinned the woman directly to the parapet. When her men saw that the boss was trapped, they threw their fists at Polaris' face and punched her again. Fortunately, the guards were able to pull them away in time. But the indiscriminate guards put Polaris in solitary confinement too. But she didn't give up for the sake of the baby in her womb. Looking at the cold metal door in front of her, she used her powers once more. And although she opened the door, but Polaris had reached her limit. Weakly, she slowly crawls out of the small dark room and leans against the wall, dying. That's when a prison guard found her. But all this effort is in vain. To prevent Polaris from escaping again, the prison moved Polaris. They had a special car made for Polaris. The car was wrapped in plastic. Polaris' powers were no longer available. Shortly afterwards, the prison van came from a distance on a prescribed route. The mutants who had been waiting for the car's tires were blown up at the right moment. Then Polaris' boyfriend sent the Invisible Man to take a look at the situation. But to his surprise, the Invisible Man suddenly emerged in the middle of the walk. He was shot to the ground. At the same time, all the mutants have lost their powers. On the other side, Ray, a mutant hiding in the shadows, looks out the window. A man with glowing gold eyes, scanning the area. He was the one who had suppressed everyone's powers. This man is Aaron, their former teammate. They see that since they can't use their powers, so they fought. So guns are drawn and the battle begins. Under cover of bullets, Ray started to get close to Aaron. A punch knocks him out. All at once, everyone's powers came back. In the prison van, Polaris heard the gunshots, tricked the guards into loosening the collar for her. Then she works with her partner to knock the guards out. But there's no iron in the room, and Polaris' powers still work. That's when her companion speaks up. Take it. What? Everything's cold. Take it. After a moment's hesitation, Polaris pulls the steel spike out of his leg. Then she ripped through both of their bandages. The guards see the situation and call for help. Polaris gives a small wave of her hand. Then the door to the prison van was slammed open. The police opened fire on Polaris. Polaris catches the bullet in the air. Without her collar, she is king. At that moment, her companion drove up, picked up the group, and took off. But no sooner are they happy. The chief of the Sentinels blocked the road with his men. Polaris had no choice but to get out of the car and face the enemy. She ignored the bullets coming at her. She reached out again and his pistol flew straight at her. The chief was already surprised by this. Then he was taken to a ruined building. Polaris reached out. A steel bar this thick was bent and put it around the chief's neck. Don't you like to put collars on people? Then try choking too. Meanwhile, the police have surrounded the building. Polaris opened his arms wide. 1,000 steel bars rise into the air. And then the arrows were fired. The boyfriend saw what was happening. He took Polaris and quickly fled the scene. A few months later, Polaris had become a mother-to-be. However, the baby in her belly was more temperamental than she was. With a single movement, tens of tons of cars are pulled over. Sorry, we were just kicking. Her companions were shocked too. It turned out to be a small fetal movement, but at night, the lights in the house kept flickering. Polaris felt she was in labor. Andy immediately took her to the special delivery room. As Polaris hissed, all the ironwork around her came crashing down on her. However, the whole process of giving birth was also very difficult, even though Polaris was using all her strength, but the baby wouldn't come out. With every cry of pain, the metal objects outside seemed to beckon. Such a terrifying sight. It felt as if the child inside was bound to be something more than ordinary. But then Polaris slowly lost consciousness. The friend next to him felt bad for a moment. If this continues, both mother and child were in danger. The moment of truth. Andy called in the 3 Frost sisters. Their eyes were red. They cast a spell on Polaris. And then, Polaris saw a new era of peace and prosperity for the mutants, and he and his children could finally live in peace and prosperity. This happy sight rekindled her desire to live. With the encouragement of her companions and doctors, this time, Polaris finally exerted all her strength. Even the tens of meters high electricity poles were damaged. The next moment, the whole city was in a state of panic. People stopped their cars to see what was going on. Unbeknownst to them, it was all just childbirth. And so, with a tremendous shock, Polaris finally gave birth to a daughter. Looking at the baby in her arms, Polaris named her Dawn. But as a new mother, Polaris didn't know what to do with the baby in her arms. Frost saw the scene. Her eyes reddened again. The baby stopped crying immediately. But on the lift ride, Frost unintentionally hummed a lullaby. Polaris instantly felt something was wrong, because it was a song she'd only ever sung when she was tucking the baby in. This meant that Frost had invaded the child's brain. Polaris was furious at the thought. Luckily, Peggy arrived just in time, and that prevented a tragedy. Shortly afterward, Polaris was about to go on a rescue mission. This time it was to rescue a girl called Jerry. Although she has the most powerful superpowers, but she was also the most tragic person in the world. The girl pushed her hands together. The bread in front of her turned into crumbs. Oh, but she didn't notice the change in her parents' eyes. At that moment, there was a loud noise outside the house. The father immediately went out to check, but the next moment, your hands where we can see them. This is loud. What are they doing here? The girl was horrified by what she saw. When she saw the look on her father's face, she couldn't believe it. That it was her real parents who had betrayed her. Disappointed, she tries to escape through the back door. But there was already an ambush, and so she was taken under control, and she was given a collar to suppress her powers, despite her powers. But she couldn't escape the betrayal of her parents. But thanks to the rescue of Polaris, the girl was finally freed, but she couldn't get over her past. She hasn't spoken. That's it. She's the key to Rita's next step. Well, she goes that. He's right. Nothing. You can see. Then they saw the girl being trampled on in prison. The 3 sisters immediately drew a breath of relief at the sight. Andy then opened up to her a little. Finally, the girl is touched by Andy's love. On a date, she also shows Andy her superpowers. It turns out that the girl can turn everything upside down, no matter how big or small, even cars. After a period of recovery and exercise, the girl finally became the backbone of the team. This was her first time in a team battle. With a wave of her little hand, Polaris, the computers on the table all exploded. What's even more frightening is that when the crowd fired, all the bullets stayed in the air. Then Peggy started to roar. Everyone instantly felt like they were dying, but just as the mission was being completed and they were about to leave, it was as if the girl suddenly remembered something. Her eyes turned cold, and the next second, Polaris was dumbfounded by the shock. She had no idea that the girl's powers were so terrifying. But this offended Peggy, because Peggy's boyfriend was in the room just now. By now, Peggy was ready to kill. On the way back, Polaris reprimanded the girl for not killing innocent people, but she had no intention of repenting, and so the girl used her powers, turning the car door right around, and with anger, she left in a hurry. On the other side, Peggy, who had just lost her boyfriend, would not let her go. She then sent out the invisible man. The girl was caught while she was resting. She was then put into a custom-made black cube, watching her suffer in there. Andy finally couldn't take it anymore. He knew that offending Peggy was a death sentence, so when no one was around, he used his powers to rip the cube apart. Andy wanted to take the girl away with him, but then the girl said, "Andy, he's only drifting down again." The next second, the lift opened, and before anyone could react, the girl started to unleash her powers. And in an instant, they're all enveloped in it, just in the nick of time. Andy swung his hand and knocked the girl out of the way. But Andy didn't expect the girl to be hit on the head. This was the end of the girl's tragic life. Andy looked at the love of his life. His mind kept going back to the good old days. Soon afterwards, with the help of Polaris, Andy finally came out of the shadows. Okay, we're mutant in this country. It's been tortured and abused. Evan McMichaelberg. Andy, this mission night is your chance to get justice. Stop. And relief. You'd never guess that the three mind-reading sisters were originally 5 people. In order to make sure they followed orders, every time the task force issued a mission to them, they would take 2 sisters hostage. But the good guys have had enough of these dehumanizing missions. That day, the doctor once again asked them to hack into the brain of a mutant. When the 3 sisters activated their powers, the mutant in front of them becomes very distressed and begged them to stop. The 3 sisters had a soft heart and withdrew their powers and asked the doctor to let him go. But not only did the doctor not agree, he threatened again. Do you care about his family? Or yours? This time, the 3 sisters finally exploded. Before they could bring back the collar, they used their powers to control the guards to shoot the doctor. Bye. Although the 3 sisters finally escaped with their lives, but the 2 remaining sisters left them forever and passed on the pain of their death to the 3 sisters. Since then, they have become emotionless killing machines. I remember wanting to telepaths is a bad idea. I swear on my mother's grave. I'm not gonna say what to Eddie. That's only show. Any capable. These minds. If I well. Oh, come on, guys. That's what you get. Now Polaris is trying to prevent the 3 sisters from reinvading Dawn's mind. She sent Dawn to her aunt's house in pain. While resting at night, Polaris saw the birthday present Magneto had given her. This makes her sad, because as a rebel, Polaris didn't understand why her father had abandoned her. It was only after she gave birth to Dawn she realized her father's intention. Then she pushed her hands together. Then a piece of iron instantly became a headband. Eventually, Polaris evolved into the next generation of Magneto. Soon it was time for their mission. Polaris awakened through affection. Determined to break free of all the cages that hold them captive, they arrived at the headquarters where the mutant colors are controlled. Polaris' hands start to push, and then slowly dragged it into the air, and then on the other side, the mutants seemed to feel something, and then a long-awaited smile appeared on their faces. Finally, they removed the sinful color. At the same time, Andy started to push again. The next second, all the servers blew up. And with that, all the mutants everywhere took off their collars. They had a new lease on life. But the mutants in prison had also taken advantage of the opportunity to escape. They were all very good at what they did. The men started to push. The next second, the chairs began to boil, and immediately they moved to another position. Then another man slapped his hands together. The chairs were blown to pieces. Although these newcomers were very talented, but Peggy didn't take kindly to them. The crowd was then shocked by Peggy's powers. This is my house. These are my rooms. Unless you're of other plans, maybe you'd better go back to wearing collar, because that can be arranged. It's present. When? But it was Polaris who saw it all. She was very much against Peggy taking these newcomers in, because these people had been guilty of so much. They'd even slaughtered an entire cruise ship's worth of people. And that's exactly what Peggy saw. She wanted to use this as an opportunity to destroy a lot of destruction. Then Polaris discovered during an operation, Peggy was exchanging documents with a rival leader. To get to the bottom of it, Polaris, later on in training, deliberately injures her arm. Then she sneaks into Peggy's room. It was only then that Polaris discovered Peggy wanted to destroy the entire government. This plan is a bit of a surprise to Polaris. The team was originally formed to stop the oppression of mutants. On the other hand, Peggy realizes that the plan has been leaked, so she sealed off the entire base and started investigating undercover agents. Polaris was scared, but then they suspect Lisa because she has the most powerful brain in the world, so much so that the three sisters couldn't read her memories. In the end, Peggy decided that it was better to kill her than to let her go. Lisa was killed. Polaris escaped with her life. Then she found Andy and told him about Peggy's ultimate plan. By this time, the team's original intentions were gone, the peace they had hoped for, and now it seemed like a joke. So they team up with other mutants to stop Peggy. On the other side, Peggy is furious when she finds out they've left. She immediately sends the three sisters to take Andy and his sister under control and took them to the executive's building. The three sisters then take control of them again, forcing them to explode with energy. Polaris, who arrived later, was still too late. By now the building had been blown to pieces. As a matter of urgency, they must get rid of Peggy. But Peggy has a special power. It's the ability to block everyone's powers. At this critical moment, Polaris' companion is ready to make a sacrifice, because he has a power like no other in the world. Finally, after saying goodbye to his family, he walked slowly to the lift. When Peggy sees him alone, she began to taunt the man and says he is the most incompetent of all the mutants. Then she starts ranting at the man, but it didn't seem to work on the man. It only made him even angrier. By now he was ready to die. Victoria. So, why is so mango? Tell me. With a huge explosion, the entire base was destroyed. After Peggy's death, the mind-reading sisters joined Polaris and took over the minds of the top brass. Through the media, they announced a decree to protect mutants. Polaris took Dawn in with her. A happy family of three begins.